They say love is blind, but in New York City, love has a price tag. Caleb Miller was a man who counted every penny, a single father trying to keep his daughter's world from falling apart. Victoria St. Clair was a woman who counted millions, a CEO who could crush competitors with a single email. They were never supposed to meet. But one rainy night, a mix-up at an exclusive restaurant changed everything. When Caleb sat down opposite his boss on a blind date she didn't know was him, he didn't find the ice queen the tabloids hated. He found a woman breaking down, and when she looked up, wiping away a tear, she said 6 words that didn't just ruin the date, they shattered his entire reality. This is the story of how a pauper met a princess, and why the truth hurts more than poverty ever could. The elevator in the St. Clair Tower didn't just move, it glided, a silent silver bullet shooting straight into the clouds. But Caleb Miller never got to ride that one. Caleb rode the service elevator, the one that smelled of industrial lemon cleaner and cold coffee. It rattled as it ascended, shaking the dolly he was gripping. On the dolly were 4 boxes of premium, heavy stock paper, destined for the executive suite on the 50th floor. "Easy, old girl," Caleb muttered to the elevator, wiping a bead of sweat from his forehead. He was 32, but his eyes looked 50. They were kind eyes, the color of worn denim, framed by lines etched by sleepless nights and the constant grinding math of poverty. Rent is due on the 1st, electric on the 5th, Lily's inhaler needs a refill on the 10th. The numbers swirled in his head like a storm that never broke. Caleb worked in the mailroom of Ether Global, a logistics and shipping conglomerate that moved half the world's luxury goods. He was the invisible machinery behind the glamour. The elevator dinged on the 50th floor. The air here was different. It was cooler, smelling of orchids and money. Caleb kept his head down, pushing the cart. He knew the rules. Be efficient. Be silent. Be invisible. He approached the glass-walled office at the end of the hall. This was the throne room. Inside, Victoria St. Clair stood facing the window, her back to the room. Even from behind, she was intimidating. She wore a tailored black suit that looked like it cost more than Caleb's car, if he still had a car. Her posture was rigid, like a steel beam. "I don't care about the board's hesitation, Jonathan," she said into her headset. Her voice was low, smooth, and terrified people 3 states away. "If the merger isn't signed by Friday, I'm not just firing the VP of sales, I'm dissolving his department." Caleb flinched. He quickly began stacking the paper near the printer, trying to make no sound. Victoria turned around. She was strikingly beautiful, with sharp cheekbones and hair the color of dark espresso. But her expression was glacial. She looked at Caleb, but she didn't see him. To her, he was just a pixel in the background of her empire. "Just get it done," she snapped, tapping her phone off. She sighed, pressing her fingers to her temples. For a split second, the armor cracked, her shoulders slumped. But then she blinked, saw the mailroom clerk lingering, and the ice returned. "Is there a reason you're staring?" she asked, her voice cutting through the silence. Caleb jumped. "No, ma'am, just finish the delivery. Sorry. Close the door on your way out." Caleb nodded and retreated to the safety of the service elevator. His heart was hammering. He hated coming up here. It reminded him of everything he couldn't give Lily. Later that evening, the reality of his life crashed back in. He picked up 6-year-old Lily from his neighbor, Mrs. Gable. "She's been coughing again, Caleb," Mrs. Gable said gently, handing over the little girl who was clutching a worn-out stuffed rabbit. "That dampness in your apartment. It's not good for her lungs." "I know, Mrs. Gable. I'm working on it. I've got some overtime coming up." It was a lie. There was no overtime. They had actually cut his hours. Back in their basement apartment, Caleb made tomato soup and grilled cheese. He watched Lily eat, her small face pale in the dim light. "Daddy?" Lily asked, wiping tomato from her lip. Is Mummy coming back for my birthday? The question was a knife to the gut. It had been 3 years since Sarah died, leaving them with nothing but medical debt and a hole in the universe. No, sweetie, remember? Mummy is with the stars, but I'm here, and we're going to have a great birthday. Once Lily was asleep, Caleb sat at his small, chipped kitchen table, staring at a stack of bills. The final notice on the electric bill was bright red. He put his head in his hands. He needed a miracle. His phone buzzed. It was Benny, the night shift security guard at Ether and Caleb's only real friend. "Yo, Cal, you awake? I got something crazy." Caleb texted back. "Always. What is it?" "You know that high-end dating app? The one the execs use? Apex? The one that costs $500 just to join?" "Yeah. Why?" "My cousin works in IT for them. He gave me a beta tester profile to sell, but the buyer flaked. It's got a credit for one platinum dinner date, fully paid. Tonight, 8 p.m., at the Obsidian." Caleb stared at the phone. The Obsidian was the most expensive restaurant in the city. A glass of water there cost more than his hourly wage. "Benny, I can't. I don't have clothes for that. And I'm not looking for a date. It's a free meal, Cal. A steak worth $200. And maybe you meet a rich girl who needs a handyman. Just go. Fake it for 2 hours. Eat the food. Bring home a doggy bag for Lily. What do you have to lose?" "What do I have to lose?" Caleb looked around his apartment. The peeling paint, the red notice on the table, the sound of Lily's wheezing breath in the next room. He had already lost everything that mattered. "Okay," Caleb whispered to the empty room. "One night. Just for the food." The rain in the city didn't wash things clean. It just made the grime slicker. Caleb stood under the awning of a bakery across the street from the Obsidian, trying to smooth down the lapels of his suit. It was a navy blue suit he'd bought for Sarah's funeral. It was the only nice thing he owned, though it was slightly tight in the shoulders now, and the fabric had a shine to it that betrayed its cheapness. He had polished his work shoes until they gleamed, hoping the dim lighting of the restaurant would hide the scuffs. He checked the app on his phone. The profile Benny had set up was vague. Name, C. Miller. Occupation, consultant. Photo, a blurry shot of him hiking from 5 years ago. His date was listed simply as V. No photo. Just a verification check mark. "Showtime," he muttered. Walking into the Obsidian was like stepping inside a diamond. The walls were black marble, the lighting was gold, and the air smelled of truffles and expensive perfume. The maitre d', a man with a moustache so thin it looked drawn on with a pen, looked Caleb up and down with a sneer. "Delivery entrance is in the alley," the man said, not bothering to look at his reservation tablet. Caleb swallowed his pride. It tasted like ash. "I have a reservation. Table 4, under Miller." The maitre d' paused, eyebrows raising. He checked the tablet. His sneer faltered, but his eyes remained cold. "Ah, the Apex booking. Right this way." He led Caleb through the dining room. Caleb felt eyes on him. He felt like an imposter, a thief who had snuck into the royal treasury. They arrived at a secluded booth in the back, draped in velvet curtains for privacy. "Your companion has already arrived," the maitre d' said, pulling back the curtain. Caleb stepped in, ready to apologize for being 2 minutes late. "I'm so sorry." The words died in his throat. Sitting at the table, clutching a glass of wine with both hands, was Victoria St. Clair. Caleb froze. Panic, cold and sharp, spiked in his chest. "Run," his brain screamed. "She'll fire you. She'll think you're stalking her. Run." But he couldn't move, because the Ice Queen of Ether Global wasn't looking at her phone. She wasn't barking orders. She was crying. Not a polite, single-tear cry. She was trembling, her head bowed, silent sobs shaking her narrow shoulders. Her mascara was slightly smudged under her left eye. She looked small. Caleb stood there, paralyzed. If he left now, she might see him go. If he stayed, he was dead. Victoria sensed a presence. She sniffed, grabbed a linen napkin, and aggressively dabbed her eyes before looking up. The transformation was instant. The wall went up. Her eyes hardened. "You're late," she said. Her voice was thick, but steady. She didn't recognize him. Caleb blinked. Of course she doesn't, he realized with a pang of dark humor. "I'm the mail guy. I'm part of the furniture." Without his blue work vest and the dolly in the dim romantic light, he was just a stranger in a cheap suit. The rain," Caleb managed, his voice raspy. He sat down slowly, terrified the chair would squeak and give him away. Victoria took a long sip of wine, finishing the glass. She signaled the waiter for another without looking away from Caleb. She studied him, his frayed cuffs, his nervous hands, the way he looked at the silverware like it might bite him. "You're not what I expected," she said bluntly. "Neither are you," Caleb said, the truth slipping out before he could stop it. Victoria let out a dry, humorless laugh. "What did you expect? A supermodel? An heiress looking for a boy toy?" "I expected someone happy," Caleb said softly. The air left the table. Victoria froze. She looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time. Her guard dropped just an inch. "Happy," she repeated the word like it was a foreign language. "I'm Victoria." "Caleb." "Well, Caleb," she leaned forward, the candlelight dancing in her wet eyes. "Let's get the formalities over with. I'm here because my mother thinks if I don't marry by 35, the company stock will drop. I'm here because my fiancé, my ex-fiancé, ran off with his fitness instructor 3 days ago. And I'm here because I hate eating alone." She was drunk, not sloppy drunk, but truth serum drunk, the kind of drunk that happens when you haven't eaten in 2 days and have been carrying the weight of the world. "I'm sorry," Caleb said, and he meant it. "Don't be," she snapped, recoiling from his pity. "So what's your story? You're sitting there looking like you're waiting for the police to come arrest you. What do you do, Caleb?" This was the moment. He could lie. He could say he was an investment banker, an architect, a consultant, like the profile said. I work in logistics," Caleb said. Technically true. "Logistics," she swirled her new glass of wine. "Boring, but necessary. Do you make money?" "Enough to get by." "Just enough," she scoffed, a cruel edge returning to her voice. She looked at his suit again. "Clearly." The waiter arrived with menus. Caleb opened his and felt the blood drain from his face. There were no prices. He knew what that meant. If you have to ask, you can't afford it. But the app said the meal was paid for. He prayed Benny was right. "Order whatever you want," Victoria said, waving a hand. "I'm paying. I assume that's why you matched with me? The platinum badge on my profile?" Caleb felt a flush of shame heat his neck. "I didn't know who you were." "Please," she rolled her eyes. "Men like you always know. You smell the desperation and the bank account." "I'm not here for your money," Caleb said, his voice firming up. He thought of Lily, of the red notice, of the indignity of his life. "I'm here because I was lonely too." Victoria stopped moving. She stared at him. For a moment, the restaurant noise faded. "Lonely," she whispered. Then her face twisted, a mix of anger and profound sadness. She leaned across the table, her voice dropping to a hiss. "Don't lie to me. I deal with liars in $1,000 suits all day. I don't need one in a... What is that? Polyester blend?" She was lashing out, like a wounded animal cornered in a trap. "You want to know why I was crying?" she asked, her voice trembling again. "Because I have 4,000 employees. I have a penthouse overlooking the park. I have a driver, a chef, and a personal shopper. And yet, the only person who has sat across from me at dinner in 6 months is a stranger who looks like he broke into his father's closet to get here." She took a breath, tears spilling over again. But her words were venomous. "Do you know how humiliating that is?" she continued. "And to look at you, struggling, obviously poor, probably hoping I'll pay your rent this month if you say the right things, and realize that this is what the algorithm thinks I deserve?" They told me my heart was worth nothing on the open market. So I suppose it's fitting they sent someone who looks like he couldn't afford to buy it, even if it were on sale. The words hung in the air, heavy and sharp. Caleb felt like he'd been slapped, his pride, already fragile, shattered. He looked at this woman, his boss, his tormentor, and yet a broken human being, and he stood up. He didn't yell. He didn't flip the table. He gently placed his napkin on the table. "You're right, Victoria," Caleb said, his voice quiet but dignified. "I can't afford you. But it's not because I'm poor." He looked her dead in the eye. "It's because you're too expensive for anyone who actually has a soul." He turned and walked away. He left the free steak. He left the warmth. He walked straight past the stunned maitre d' and back out into the cold, pouring rain. He didn't know that back at the table, Victoria St. Clair was watching him go, her mouth slightly open, the cruelty fading from her eyes to be replaced by a sudden, terrifying realization of what she had just done. The walk home took 45 minutes. Caleb didn't take the subway. He couldn't bear the bright lights or the crush of bodies. He walked in the rain, letting the water soak through the cheap polyester of his suit, ruining it completely. It didn't matter. He would never have a reason to wear it again. When he finally unlocked the door to the basement apartment, the air was thick and humid. The dehumidifier in the corner was buzzing, a red light blinking to indicate the tank was full. Mrs. Gable was asleep in the armchair, a crochet blanket pulled up to her chin. She woke with a start as the door clicked shut. "Caleb, you're soaked to the bone," she whispered, pulling herself up. She looked at his face, the hollowed eyes, the set jaw. Did the dinner go well?" Caleb stripped off the wet jacket and hung it on a chair. It dripped a puddle onto the linoleum. "No, it didn't." "Did you get food?" Caleb paused. The hunger in his stomach was a sharp, physical pain, but the memory of Victoria's words was sharper. "You couldn't afford to buy my heart, even if it were on sale." "I wasn't hungry," he lied. He walked to the bedroom door and cracked it open. Lily was asleep, but her breathing was ragged. It sounded like a whistle trapped in a tin can. The dampness of the apartment was killing her, slowly, night by night. "She coughed up something dark earlier," Mrs. Gable said softly, coming up behind him. "Caleb, I'm scared for her." "I know, Mrs. Gable, I know." Caleb closed the door, leaning his forehead against the wood. "I'll fix it, I promise." But promises were not currency. The next morning, Ether Global was a war zone. Word had spread that the merger was on shaky ground. The atmosphere on the 50th floor was toxic. As Caleb made his rounds with the mail cart, he saw executives sweating, ties loosened, frantically typing. He kept his head down, his blue cap pulled low. He was terrified, not just of being fired, but of her. Would she recognize him? Would she realize the man she humiliated at the Obsidian was the same man who delivered her Forbes magazine? He reached the executive suite, his heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. The glass doors were open. Victoria was pacing. She wasn't wearing the armor-like suit today. She wore a cream-colored dress that made her look softer, but her energy was frantic. "Find him," she was saying into her phone. "What do you mean the profile is deleted?" Caleb froze near the copier, his back to her. "I don't care if it was a beta profile, Jonathan," she shouted, causing her assistant to jump. "Contact the app developers. Get the IP address. I want to know who C. Miller is." Caleb's blood ran cold. She was hunting him. Why? Victoria stopped pacing, staring out the window at the skyline. Because I owe him an apology. Or maybe I just want to prove he was a fraud. Just find him. She hung up and spun around. Her eyes swept the room. They landed on Caleb. Time stopped. Caleb gripped the handle of the mail cart so hard his knuckles turned white. He didn't breathe. He waited for the spark of recognition, for the finger to point, for security to be called. Victoria narrowed her eyes. She walked toward him, This is it, Caleb thought. It's over. She stopped 3 feet away. The scent of her expensive perfume, jasmine and sandalwood, filled his nose, instantly transporting him back to the candle-lit booth. "You," she said. Caleb looked up, forcing his face into a mask of dull obedience. "Yes, Miss St. Clair." She stared at his face. She looked at his chin, his nose, his eyes. For a second, confusion clouded her gaze. She tilted her head. "Have we—" she started, then shook her head, seemingly dismissing the thought. The blue cap, the grey work vest, the slump of his shoulders. It was a perfect disguise. She couldn't reconcile the man in the suit who spoke with such quiet dignity with this grunt worker. "This cart," she said, gesturing vaguely. "It's squeaking. It's annoying. Fix it." "Yes, ma'am. Immediately. And tell maintenance the temperature in here is fluctuating. It's freezing." "Yes, ma'am." She turned her back on him. "Get out." Caleb practically ran to the elevator. Once the doors closed, he collapsed against the metal wall, sliding down until he hit the floor. He was hyperventilating. She was looking for him. But she was looking for a ghost. C. Miller. The consultant didn't exist. Caleb Miller, the mail clerk, was invisible. He was safe. But safety didn't pay the bills. That afternoon, his phone rang. It was the school nurse. "Mr. Miller, it's Lily." She collapsed during recess. She couldn't breathe. The ambulance is on its way to St. Jude S. Caleb dropped a stack of packages in the middle of the hallway. He didn't clock out. He didn't ask permission. He ran. The emergency room at St. Jude's smelled of antiseptic and despair. Caleb burst through the sliding doors, his work vest still on, sweat drenching his shirt. He found Lily in a curtained-off bay. She was hooked up to a nebulizer, her tiny chest heaving up and down rapidly, her skin a terrifying shade of grey. "Daddy!" she wheezed, her eyes wide with panic. "I'm here, baby. I'm here." Caleb grabbed her hand. It was cold. A doctor stepped in, holding a clipboard. Dr. Evans. He looked tired. "Mr. Miller," Dr. Evans said, his voice grave. "We've stabilized her for now, but this is the 3rd time this month. Her asthma is exacerbated by pneumonia. Her lungs are incredibly weak. We need to admit her to the PICU immediately for aggressive antibiotic treatment and oxygen therapy." "Okay," Caleb said, stroking Lily's hair. "Do it. Whatever she needs." "There is a complication," the doctor said, lowering his voice. "We ran your insurance card. It was declined. Your coverage lapsed 3 weeks ago." Caleb felt the floor drop out from under him. The cut hours. When Ether cut him to part-time, he lost the benefits package. He had gambled that nothing bad would happen until he found a second job. He lost. I can pay cash," Caleb stammered. "I'll set up a payment plan. For admission to the PICU without insurance, the hospital policy requires an upfront deposit," Dr. Evans said, looking pained. He hated this part of the job. "It's $5,000, Mr. Miller. Do you have that?" $5,000. He might as well have asked for the moon. Caleb had $42 in his checking account. "Please," Caleb begged, grabbing the doctor's sleeve. "She's dying. You can't turn her away." "We won't turn her away for emergency stabilization," the doctor said gently. "But for the long-term treatment she needs, the administration is strict. You have 24 hours to secure the funds or insurance, or we'll have to transfer her to the county hospital." The county hospital was underfunded, overcrowded, and across the city. Lily wouldn't survive the transfer in this state. "I'll get the money," Caleb said, his voice shaking. "I swear. Just keep her here." Caleb spent the next hour making frantic calls. He called Benny. Benny had $200. He called a payday loan place. They laughed at his credit score. He called his landlord, begging for the rent back. The landlord hung up. He sat in the hallway, head in his hands. He was out of options, except one. Ether Global had an Employee Emergency Hardship Fund. It was a PR stunt, mostly, meant to make the company look benevolent. He had read about it in the handbook. It granted interest-free loans to employees in crisis. But there was a catch. Any amount over $1,000 required the personal signature of the CEO. Caleb looked at his phone. 4 p.m. She would still be in the office. He looked back at Lily, sleeping fitfully under the harsh fluorescent lights. He thought of his pride. He thought of the way Victoria had looked at him at the restaurant. The disdain, the cruelty. You look like you're waiting for the police to arrest you. If he went to her, he would be revealing everything. He would be the beggar she predicted he was. He would be proving her right. Let her be right, a voice in his head screamed. Lily needs to breathe. Caleb stood up. He kissed Lily's forehead. Daddy has to go to work for a little bit, baby. I'll be right back. He ran out of the hospital and caught a bus back to the tower. When he arrived at the 50th floor, it was 5:30 p.m. The office was emptying out. The sun was setting, casting long, bloody shadows across the glass walls. Caleb didn't have his mail cart this time. He walked to the assistant's desk. I need to see Miss St. Clair, Caleb said. The assistant, a young man named Greg, who spent more time on TikTok than working, looked up over his glasses. She's in a meeting, and mail pickup was at 2. You missed it. It's not about mail. It's personal. It's an emergency. She doesn't do personal emergencies for staff, dude. Fill out a form online. I don't have time for online. Caleb's voice rose, cracking with desperation. Please, just tell her it's Caleb Miller. Tell her it's about the hardship fund. The door to the inner office opened. Victoria stood there. She looked exhausted. She was holding a tumbler of scotch. What is all this shouting? She demanded. Greg pointed a finger. Sorry, Miss St. Clair. This mail guy is demanding to see you. I was just calling security. Victoria looked at Caleb. She sighed, a sound of deep irritation. Miller, right? The one with the squeaky cart. Yes, Caleb said. He stepped forward, removing his cap. He held it in his hands, wringing the fabric. Miss St. Clair, please. I need 5 minutes. It's a matter of life and death. Victoria swirled her drink. She looked at him, really looked at him. There was something in his voice, a raw, jagged edge that triggered a memory. It wasn't the voice of a subordinate. It was the voice of a man with nothing left to lose. 5 minutes, she said, turning back into her office. Greg, hold security, but leave the door open. Caleb walked into the lion's den. The office was vast, with a view of the city that cost more than Caleb would earn in 10 lifetimes. Victoria sat behind her massive mahogany desk, not offering him a seat. Speak, she commanded. My daughter is in the hospital, Caleb started, fighting to keep his voice steady. She has severe asthma and pneumonia. My insurance lapsed because my hours were cut. They need $5,000 to keep her in the PICU. If they move her, she might. He choked on the word. Victoria's face remained impassive. She tapped a pen on her desk. And you want the company to pay for it? I want to apply for the Emergency Hardship Fund. I'll pay it back. Take it out of my checks for the next 10 years. I don't care. I just need the signature. Victoria sighed. She opened a drawer and pulled out a file. Mr. Miller, that fund is for full-time employees. You are part-time. I was full-time for 5 years until last month, Caleb argued. I've never been late. I've never missed a shift until today. Policy is policy, Victoria said coldly. If I make an exception for you, I have to make it for every warehouse worker with a sob story. The shareholders would have my head. She closed the file. The sound was like a gunshot. Is that it? She asked. Caleb stared at her. He felt a heat rising in his chest, a fire that burned away the fear. This wasn't a businesswoman. This was a monster. You have 4,000 employees, Caleb said, his voice low. You make millions a year, and you're going to let a 6-year-old girl suffer because of policy? Victoria's eyes flashed. Watch your tone. No, Caleb stepped closer to the desk. I won't. You know, someone told me recently that you were the Ice Queen. I defended you. I thought maybe you were just misunderstood." Victoria froze. Her hand tightened on the glass. "But you're not misunderstood," Caleb continued, the tears finally spilling over. "You're empty. You sit in this tower and you move numbers around, but you don't know what it means to actually feel anything." Victoria stood up, slamming her hand on the desk. "Get out! You're fired! Get out of my office before I have you arrested!" "I'm going," Caleb said. He turned to the door. "But I hope you remember this moment, Victoria, when you're sitting in your penthouse tonight, drinking your $1,000 wine. I hope you remember that you could have saved a little girl's life with the stroke of a pen. And you chose not to." He reached the door, then stopped. He turned back one last time. "By the way," he said, his voice breaking, "the steak was overcooked." The silence that followed was deafening. Victoria's eyes went wide. The glass tumbler slipped from her hand and shattered on the floor, splashing amber liquid and crystal shards everywhere. "What did you say?" she whispered. But Caleb was already gone. Victoria stood amidst the broken glass, her heart pounding in her ears. The steak was overcooked. She had complained about the steak at the Obsidian to the waiter before her date arrived. But the only person she had eaten with, the only person who knew. She looked at the empty doorway where the mail clerk, Miller, had just stood. C. Miller. Caleb. The realization hit her like a physical blow. The man in the cheap suit. The man with the kind eyes who had walked out on her. The man who told her she had no soul. He was the mail guy. He was the one begging for his daughter's life. And she had just fired him. Victoria St. Clair stared at the puddle of amber liquid and broken crystal on her office floor. Her hands were shaking so violently she had to grip the edge of her desk to steady herself. The steak was overcooked. The words echoed in her mind, bouncing off the glass walls of her office. It was a code, a secret handshake, a sentence only 2 people in the world shared from that specific, humiliating night. The man she had called a fraud, the man she had insulted for his cheap suit, the man she had just fired for begging to save his daughter, was Caleb. "Greg!" she screamed. Her assistant rushed in, phone in hand, looking terrified. "Security is on the way, Miss St. Clair. They're taking the elevator up." "Cancel security," Victoria barked. She rounded the desk, her heels clicking sharply on the hard wood. "Get me Caleb Miller's personnel file, now. Not the digital summary. I want the hard copy. And call my driver. Tell him to bring the car around. Front entrance, immediately. But your 6 p.m. call with Tokyo, cancel it. Cancel everything." Greg scrambled to the filing cabinet. Victoria paced, her heart racing in a way it hadn't since she was a child. She felt sick. A physical wave of nausea rolled over her. She thought of the dinner. She had told him, "You couldn't afford to buy my heart," and he had replied, "You're too expensive for anyone who actually has a soul." She looked around her office, the awards on the wall, the view of the skyline, the absolute silence of her power. Suddenly it didn't look like success, it looked like a mausoleum. Greg handed her a thin manila folder. "Here, Miller, Caleb, mailroom clerk." Victoria snatched it and ripped it open. She scanned the pages as she walked to the elevator. Employment start, 5 years ago. Performance review, exemplary. Notes: widower, 1 dependent. Daughter, Lily, age 6. There was a photo attached to his application. It was 5 years younger, the face less lined, the eyes brighter. He was smiling. It was the face of a man who still had hope. And there, clipped to the back, was the form he had just tried to submit. The Emergency Hardship Fund request. Reason: life-saving treatment for dependent. Amount: $5,000. She had denied it without even reading it. She had valued her company policy over a child's life. The elevator doors opened. Victoria didn't walk. She ran. She ignored the startled looks of the lobby security guards. She burst out into the cool evening air where her black town car was waiting. "Where to, Miss St. Clair?" the driver asked, holding the door. "St. Jude's Hospital," she said, diving into the back seat. "And Arthur, drive fast." As the car wove through the city traffic, Victoria pulled out her phone. She dialed the CFO of Ether Global. "Victoria?" The voice on the other end answered, surprised. "Is everything all right?" "Listen to me, Marcus. I need you to authorize an immediate wire transfer. I don't care what account it comes from. I don't care if you have to pull it from my personal trust." "Okay. How much?" $50,000, she said. Then she paused. She thought of the fear in Caleb's eyes. "No, make it 100, and I need the confirmation number texted to me in 5 minutes." She hung up. She looked out the window at the blurred city lights. She had spent years building a fortress around herself, convincing herself that emotions were a liability, that empathy was a weakness. She was the Ice Queen. It kept her safe. But as she watched the rain streak against the glass, she realized the ice hadn't protected her. It had just frozen her heart. And somewhere in this city, a little girl was paying the price for it. St. Jude's Hospital was a labyrinth of misery. Victoria had never been to a public hospital. Her doctors made house calls. When she had her appendix out, she stayed in a private suite that looked like a hotel. This was different. The waiting room was crowded with people who looked exhausted. Babies were crying. The TV in the corner blared a mindless game show. The air smelled of stale coffee and fear. Victoria, still in her cream-colored designer dress, looked like she had been dropped from a different planet. Heads turned as she marched to the reception desk. "I'm looking for a patient," she said to the nurse behind the glass. "Lily Miller, admitted this afternoon." The nurse didn't look up from her computer. "Family only." "I am family," Victoria lied without hesitating. "I'm her aunt." The nurse sighed, typing slowly. "Lily Miller, pediatric unit, but they're processing her for transfer." "Transfer? To where?" "County. The insurance didn't clear. The ambulance is coming in 20 minutes. "No," Victoria said, her voice rising. "She is not going anywhere." She turned and walked past the desk. "Ma'am, you can't go back there," the nurse shouted. Victoria ignored her. She followed the signs for the PICU. She pushed through the double doors, her eyes scanning the curtained bays. She heard him before she saw him. "It's going to be an adventure, Lil Bit." Caleb's voice was soft, cracking around the edges. "We're going to take a ride in another ambulance. It'll have lights and sirens." Victoria stopped. She peered around the edge of a blue curtain. Caleb was packing a small plastic bag, a stuffed rabbit, a pair of pink socks. His hands were shaking. In the bed, a tiny girl with Caleb's denim blue eyes was watching him, a plastic oxygen mask covering half her face. She looked frail, like a gust of wind could blow her away. "Is the new hospital nice?" Lily asked, her voice muffled by the mask. It's great," Caleb lied. A tear slid down his nose. "It's got lots of other kids to play with." Victoria felt her heart shatter. She stepped into the bay. "She doesn't have to go, Caleb." Caleb spun around. When he saw her, his face didn't register surprise. It registered pure, unadulterated hatred. He stepped between Victoria and the bed, shielding his daughter. His posture was defensive. "Dangerous. Get out!" he snarled. It was a low, animalistic sound. "You don't get to be here. You don't get to see her." "Caleb, please." Victoria held up her hands. "I didn't know." "You didn't care," Caleb shouted. The sound drew the attention of the nurse's station, but he didn't care. "I told you. I stood in your office and I told you she was dying. And you talked to me about policy. You fired me. You took away the only way I had to feed her." "I know," Victoria whispered. Tears were streaming down her face now, ruining her perfect makeup. "I know I was a monster. I know there is nothing I can say to fix that." "Then why are you here?" Caleb pointed a trembling finger at the door. "To gloat? To see the overcooked steak guy lose everything? Get out before "I paid for it," Victoria blurted out. Caleb froze. "What?" "I paid for it," she repeated, stepping closer, though he flinched. "I just wired the money to the hospital administration. All of it. The deposit, the treatment, the stay, everything. She doesn't have to move. Dr. Evans is on his way back now to restart the admission." Caleb stared at her. The anger in his eyes warred with confusion. He looked at Lily, who was watching them with wide, frightened eyes. "Why?" Caleb asked, his voice breaking. "Is this PR? Is this so you can sleep at night?" "No," Victoria said. She looked at Lily. "It's because you were right. I am lonely, and I am empty. But tonight I don't want to be the villain in your story." Dr. Evans pulled back the curtain, looking breathless. "Mr. Miller," the doctor said, looking between Caleb and Victoria. "We just received a notification from billing. The account has been settled, in full, plus a credit for future care." Caleb let out a breath that sounded like a sob. He slumped against the bed rail, his legs giving out. "She stays?" Caleb asked the doctor. "She stays," Dr. Evans confirmed. "We're moving her to a private room in the PICU immediately. We can start the heavy antibiotics within the hour." Caleb covered his face with his hands. He wept. Not the silent weeping of a man trying to be strong, but the racking, heaving sobs of a father who had been holding up the sky for too long and finally let it go. Victoria stood there, unsure of what to do. The old Victoria would have left. Transaction complete. Problem solved. But she didn't leave. She walked over to the plastic chair in the corner, the uncomfortable orange hospital chair, and sat down. Caleb wiped his face with his sleeve. He looked at her. "You don't have to stay. You did your good deed." "I have nowhere else to be," Victoria said quietly. "My apartment is empty. My friends are employees. My fiancé is gone." She looked at him, stripping away the CEO veneer. "I'd like to stay," she said, "if you'll let me." Caleb looked at her for a long time. He saw the regret in her eyes. He saw the woman from the restaurant, the one who cried into her wine, not the tyrant from the office. He nodded slowly. "Okay." They moved Lily to the private room. It was quiet. The machines hummed rhythmically. Lily fell into a deep, drug-induced sleep, her breathing finally easing. Caleb sat on one side of the bed. Victoria sat on the other. Hours passed. The rain battered the window. "I lost my sister," Victoria said suddenly. It was 2 a.m. The hospital was silent. Caleb looked up. "What?" "When I was 12, Victoria said, staring at Lily's sleeping hand. "She had leukemia. My parents, they were busy, building the empire, building ether. They threw money at it. Best doctors, best hospitals. But they were never there. I sat in the chair. I held her hand when she died." She looked at Caleb. "I became the ice queen, and because it hurt too much to care," she confessed. "I thought if I just focused on the numbers, if I just focused on success, I'd never have to feel that helpless again. But when I saw you today, when I saw how much you loved her, even when you had nothing, it reminded me of everything I lost." Caleb reached across the bed. He didn't take her hand. That was too much, too soon. But he placed his hand near hers on the blanket. "I'm sorry about your sister," Caleb said. "I'm sorry I fired you," Victoria replied, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. "You're rehired, by the way, with a raise." "I should hope so." Caleb managed a weak chuckle. "I know the CEO. She owes me a steak." The tension in the room broke. For the first time that night, the air didn't feel heavy. Victoria looked at Caleb Miller, tired, poor, wearing a stained shirt, and realized she felt safer in this hospital room than she had ever felt in her penthouse. But the story wasn't over. Life, like business, had a way of correcting the market. And just as things seemed to be settling, the door to the room opened. It wasn't a nurse. It was a man in a sharp grey suit, holding a briefcase. He looked out of place, his eyes scanning the room until they landed on Caleb. "Caleb Miller?" the man asked. "Yes?" Caleb stood up, confused. My name is Arthur Pendleton. I'm a private investigator." The man stepped into the room. "I've been looking for you for 6 months. It's regarding your late wife, Sarah." Caleb went rigid. "Sarah? What about her?" The man glanced at Victoria, then back to Caleb. "There was an anomaly in her family trust," the investigator said. "It turns out Sarah wasn't who she said she was, and neither is your daughter." Caleb's face went pale. Victoria stood up, her protective instinct flaring. "What do you mean?" Caleb whispered. "I mean," the investigator opened his briefcase, "that your wife was the estranged daughter of the Duke of Roxbury, and your daughter, Lily." He looked at the sleeping girl. "Lily is the sole heir to one of the largest estates in England." The room spun. Caleb grabbed the bedrail. Victoria stared at the investigator, then at the poor single dad who had been scrubbing floors to pay rent. The pauper wasn't just a pauper, and the twists were just beginning. The silence in the hospital room was heavier than the humid air in Caleb's basement apartment. The private investigator, Mr. Pendleton, placed a thick binder on the bedside table next to Lily's inhaler. "I understand this is a shock," Pendleton said, his tone apologetic. "Lady Sarah, excuse me, your wife, ran away from the estate in Devonshire when she was 19. She wanted to study art. She wanted a life where her surname didn't dictate her future. She cut all ties." Caleb sank into the chair, his head spinning. Sarah. His Sarah, who clipped coupons for pasta sauce and sewed patches onto his work jeans. She wasn't just a girl from Ohio, as she'd claimed. She was Lady Sarah of Roxbury. "The Duke passed away 2 weeks ago," Pendleton continued. "He never stopped looking for her. In his will, he bypassed his siblings. He left the entire estate, the title and the trust fund to his direct line. Since Sarah has passed, everything belongs to Lily, with you as the trustee until she comes of age." "How much?" Victoria asked. Her voice was quiet, stripped of its usual command. "The liquid assets are approximately £40 million, Pendleton said casually. "The real estate is worth triple that." Caleb looked at his hands, rough, calloused, scarred from moving boxes. A minute ago, he was a man who couldn't afford a $5,000 medical bill. Now his daughter was worth more than the building they were sitting in. "I don't want it," Caleb whispered. "You don't have a choice, Mr. Miller," Pendleton said gently. "It's her birthright. It will pay for the best doctors in the world. She will never wheeze in a damp basement again." The investigator bowed slightly, left his card, and exited the room, leaving a vacuum of stunned silence behind him. Caleb looked at Victoria. He expected her to be relieved. He expected the CEO, the woman who understood the language of money, to be happy that the problem was solved. But Victoria looked defeated. She stood up slowly, smoothing the wrinkles in her dress. She picked up her purse. "Well," she said, a brittle smile forming on her lips, "it seems my check won't be necessary after all. You can reimburse the company once the trust fund clears." "Victoria?" Caleb stood up. "I should go," she said, backing toward the door. "You have a lot to process, lawyers to call, a new life to build. You don't need this." She gestured vaguely to herself, to the hospital room, to the intimacy they had shared just moments ago. "What are you doing?" Caleb stepped around the bed, blocking her path. "I'm leaving, Caleb. You're not the poor single dad anymore. You're royalty, practically. You don't need a boss who fired you. You don't need a savior." Caleb saw it then. The fear. For the first time, he saw the terrified 12-year-old girl inside the powerful CEO. She had opened herself up because he was vulnerable, because he needed her. Now that he was her equal, or perhaps even her superior in wealth, she was terrified she had no value to him. She thought her only currency was her money. "You think this changes anything?" Caleb asked, gesturing to the binder. "It changes everything," Victoria cried, her composure cracking. "You can buy the restaurant where I insulted you. You can buy my building. You don't need me to sit in this chair. You're right, Caleb said firmly. I don't need you to pay the bills anymore. I don't need you to save Lily. Victoria flinched, looking down. Right, so I'll just go. But Caleb's voice softened. He reached out, and for the first time, took her hand. Her fingers were cold. His were warm. Money can buy a bed, Victoria. It can't buy someone to sit in the chair next to it at 3 a.m. He stepped closer, invading her personal space, smelling the jasmine perfume mixed with the sterile hospital air. I didn't stay in this room because you wrote a check, Caleb said, looking deep into her eyes. I let you stay because when I told you the steak was overcooked, you listened. I let you stay because you were the only person in the world who saw me. Victoria looked up, tears pooling in her eyes again. I'm difficult, Caleb. I'm work-obsessed. I'm broken. I'm a mail clerk who lives in a basement with a secret princess, Caleb smiled, a genuine, tired, handsome smile. I think we're all a little broken. That's how the light gets in. He squeezed her hand. Don't go back to the penthouse, Victoria. Stay. Not because of the money, but because I'm still lonely. And I think you are too. Victoria St. Clair, the woman who made grown men tremble in boardrooms, let out a shaky breath. She looked at the door, then back at the man holding her hand. She dropped her purse on the floor. Okay, she whispered. I'll stay. The rain had stopped long ago. It was a crisp autumn day in Central Park. Caleb sat on a bench, but he wasn't wearing a polyester suit. He was wearing a soft cashmere sweater, watching a healthy, rosy-cheeked Lily run through the fallen leaves. She wasn't wheezing. She was laughing. Next to him sat Victoria. She wasn't on her phone. She was holding a cup of coffee. Cheap bodega coffee, not the expensive stuff. So, Victoria said, leaning her head on his shoulder, the board is still freaking out that I promoted the mail guy to director of philanthropy. Let them freak out, Caleb chuckled. I'm doing a good job. The new wing at St. Jude's opens next week. It does, she agreed. She looked at him, her eyes soft and clear. You know, I still haven't found a replacement for you in the mailroom. The new guy mixes up the priority shipping. Hard to replace perfection, Caleb teased. He looked at his daughter, then at the woman who had helped save her life. He thought about the £40 million sitting in a trust for Lily. It was security, yes. It was a future. But he looked at Victoria's hand resting on his knee, and he knew the truth. He had walked into the Obsidian that rainy night looking for a free meal. He had left with his dignity shredded, but in the wreckage of their pride, amidst the shattered glass of her office and the beeping monitors of the Picu, they had found something worth more than the St. Clair fortune and the Roxbury estate combined. They found the truth, that love isn't about what you can afford. It's about who you can't afford to lose. Caleb kissed the top of her head. Ready to go home? Victoria smiled. I am home. And that is the story of Caleb and Victoria. In a world obsessed with status, net worth, and job titles, it took a tragedy to remind them that we are all just human beings waiting for someone to sit in the dark with us. Caleb thought he was poor because he had no money, and Victoria thought she was rich because she had it all. But in the end, they realized they were both bankrupt until they found each other. It makes you wonder, how many times have we walked past a Caleb or a Victoria and judged them based on a suit or a job title? How many connections have we missed because we were looking at the price tag instead of the person? If this story touched your heart, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel. And I want to know your thoughts in the comments. Do you believe true love can survive a financial gap like this? Or is money always a factor? Let's talk about it. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss a story that hits you right in the feels. Thanks for listening. And remember, be kind, because you never know the battle someone is fighting.